Hey everybody, welcome to the latest episode of the Rock Experience with Mike Brunn. On this episode, we wanted to take a few moments to talk about the recent announcement that Nicko McBrain was going to be retiring from touring with Iron Maiden after 40 plus years. I know this took a lot of us by surprise and there's lots to talk about. Alrighty, I think you guys are going to really enjoy this episode, so let's jump in and let's get started. Hey everybody, welcome to the latest episode of the Rock Experience with Mike Brunn. Today I have with me my buddy, my comrade, my partner in crime, the man who's dancing the jig over there right now. Look at him in a good mood. Look at him, Mr. Vincent LaRusso. How you doing, bloody?
I'm always in a good mood when I have my Nespresso.
I was hoping as you did, I'm always in a I was hoping you'd spill it and I'd get my wish right there.
Damn.
Yes. That was glorious.
Hold on.
Uh,
Now I got to do the rest of this podcast with a wet hand.
That's great. I love
Go
it.
ahead. I'll adore it for you.
Oh, wow. Look at that. Look at that. You know what? That made my evening already.
Unfortunately, this podcast is not going to make mine.
Oh, not a kind guy, but
Well, I mean, I go based on the topic. I mean, I'm just trying to say, this is not a merry podcast.
Well, all right. Well, that's funny. I'm glad that was a perfect segue there, right? So we said we wanted to come on, talk a little about Nicko McBrain retiring from Iron Maiden. And you said this is not a merry podcast. And yes, on one hand, it's not, another one of musical icons from our years of growing up is no longer going to be performing. But
we'll be alive. That's at least it's better.
Right, exactly. Right. So, but what I actually like about this, and there's a lot to talk about here, but he kind of did it somewhat on his terms. And I say somewhat because we know he had a stroke last year, and we'll talk about that maybe for a little bit. But I like that here we are getting on a podcast to talk about somebody no longer performing. But like you just said, he's still with us. In fact, based on the press release, it sounds like there's even a chance he's going to still record with them in the future. He just wanted to stop touring. And for crying out loud, he's 72 years old, right? Think about it. Not yesterday, earlier today, you and I were talking. We were like, oh, maybe I could retire at 62 or 61. It would be great if I could retire at 60. This man is 72 years old, playing a very physical instrument, touring the world, living out of a suitcase.
And he travels with a suitcase.
Because I don't know anybody who doesn't travel with a suitcase, but that's another whole thing altogether. But
some people travel with a briefcase
or a backpack,
or anyway. A knapsack.
Nobody has a freaking clue what we're talking about right now. But anyway, to me, it wasn't as sad as maybe you were alluding to, but maybe you feel a little bit different. You feel a little bit different than I am about that?
I mean, listen, it's always sad when you see your musical heroes kind of either retire or pass, right? I mean, I don't know what it is. Well, I think I do know what it is. As we get older, as we reminisce about our childhood, and as we lose, unfortunately, our childhood heroes, or our heroes don't play anymore, it kind of your own mortality, is that the word I wanted to use? It puts a lot of things in perspective, and you want these things to continue on forever. I had told you I was on a kick, and I was listening to some of like the classic some ballads from the 80s. I told you, I'm always bring up Cinderella and Great White and Warrant, and I was just like, man, this is never gonna happen again. Boy, did
Mm-hmm.
we grow up in such a great time with great music. The videos were great, as campy as they were, whatever. Just it doesn't exist anymore. And there's a lot of great things that exist. Let me just be very clear. I think I told you, or if I told you or somebody else yesterday or the day before, 90% of my TV watching is YouTube.
Yeah.
I watch so much YouTube content, whether it's current events, whether it's I'm obsessed right now with guitar pedals, and I'm just watching, the JHS pedals. I mean, this guy is just someone who I admire what he does. A little shop in like Kansas City, builds his own pedals. And I start watching one, and that we didn't have when we were kids. This is my
Right.
point. This
Right.
type of stuff we didn't have. Or if I want to learn how to do the guitar solo for whatever, or the drum solo, or this or that, or play the bass line. Oh man, Hope Guitar Player magazine this month has Detroit Rock City. Oh shit. Well, all right, it's got
Yeah.
you got another thing coming. All right, well
Right.
that's cool. Now
Right.
I'm like, I go show 15 people showing how to play Detroit Rock City or whatever song. We didn't have that. So
No.
there's the good and bad of what we have today.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I mean, to what you were saying, I mean, it's difficult, but as we always say, we like to celebrate, right? The career and
Absolutely.
admire the accomplishments. And I was looking at the accomplishments, the amount of albums he's played on, which
Mm-hmm.
he had 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14. I'm very quickly counting about 15 for the Wikipedia.
Right.
And the one thing about him, I like how I just totally took this podcast over.
Go right ahead. Don't
You know,
worry.
the one thing I always admired about Nicko McBrain was, first of all, his setup was always like, he could kind of barely see him. He always had the toms angled in such a way, and he was like behind this tremendous. He played sonars back in the day when I was like, "What is sonar?" People were playing Pearl Tama, Ludwig, and then I saw sonar, and I was like, "Wow, what's this? The sonar?" To only come to find out, it was a very high end brand
Right.
of drums. And then a lot of stuff he did with Maiden, majority of the stuff he played as a single bass drummer, where everybody was playing double bass
Right.
back in the day.
Yeah.
And as heavy and as powerful as Iron Maiden did, he was doing it like John Bonham, and he just had such good single bass technique, bass pedal, that I don't know if it was the Book of Souls album. I remember my brother telling me, he's like, when we were listening to it in the car, like he was playing double bass parts with a single bass drum, but it was so close and convincing. Like he wanted to do like double bass parts with one foot,
Right.
he just, and I'm not saying he didn't play double bass at some point or whatever, but I just remember that was like just an incredible achievement, just as a drummer or someone
Right.
who plays the instrument.
Right. Right. Yeah. To me, I think one of the surprises, obviously, he had some health issues last year. We know about that. We'll talk about that in a moment. But I was surprised a little bit about the way they went about this. And it says a lot about him and the band. They made the announcement the morning of his final show. Clearly, they didn't want to make this like a big countdown or run off the, hey, he's going to be with us for the next 2, 3 months. They also clearly had this in motion because, the following day, they announced his replacement. And I think to me, that was maybe the biggest surprise is that it was kind of like here today, gone later today type of thing. It was like, even though he had some of those health issues last year, for me, the quickness of this announcement and then that it was that day it was going to be his last show. I think that's the part that kind of took me a little bit by surprise, and it's not typical for the way these things usually go down. Did you any thoughts on that? Just the way it was like so sudden, I'll say, that they made the
Well,
announcement.
well, was it sudden, planned sudden, or was it sudden because it had to be sudden? Was it just woke up and just, I just can't do this anymore?
No,
And they were always kind of like waiting. They had a guy
uh,
waiting in the wings. Do we know that?
no, but the fact that they had the press release that morning, then the press release ready to go the next day, with the replacement, my gut tells me that this was in motion already for a few months, and they just kept it,
Mm-hmm.
under lock and key. But
Well, yeah, okay.
that's just my opinion. I don't know that for sure, but I would
Mm-hmm.
suspect that they've known for a few months. And look, he had a stroke last year in January, right? So we're coming up on, I guess, almost 2 years ago that he had a stroke, and for part of that time, half of his body was paralyzed. Now, as a drummer, 70 plus years old, there's an opportunity there to say, I'm out. I've done this for 40 years. I'm going to take care of my health and all. But he kind of worked his way back to touring this year. So from that, when you look at it from that point of view, you say, I'm glad he kind of decided,
Mm,
family and his life and his health was going to be the priority. And he wasn't going to kind of just keep going down that road of, rehearsal, practice, touring at 72 years old. I'm glad he's taking care of himself. So from that point of view, to me, it's not a surprise. It's just how quickly was the announcement, final show, replacement, all within 24 hours. That part surprised me.
hmm
But I think that they had this in motion. That's just my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah, you're probably right. You're
Yeah.
probably right. And he's one of those guys too. Remember, with especially with Iron Maiden, I know was it Paul Diano recently passed,
Yeah.
and it's kind of a rare thing when you have an original member pass or leave a band or ask to leave a band, and then somebody comes in and becomes even more popular.
Sure.
It happened. There you could debate. Bon Scott and then Brian Johnson. I mean, and my point of saying this is that Clive Burr was the original drummer of Maiden, I think from 78 to 82 or whatever it
Yep.
was, and was highly regarded as a great drummer. You listen to those early records, great drumming.
Yeah. And he's
Um,
drumming on Number of the Beast, one of their classic albums. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, he's very guy who doesn't really get talked about much, but he should. I remember when I was young and learning, and one of my drumming mentors would mentioned him as one of the guys to listen to, and
Mm-hmm.
but then you come in and you have big shoes to fill, and then not only do you make a name for your own, but you're there 40 years,
Yeah.
whatever it
Yeah.
is. It's an incredible achievement. And
Yeah.
there were things, and I spoke about the single bass drum. There were things about Iron Maiden that I always admired about drums. Typically, when you're doing verses, you're playing hi-hat. When you're doing choruses, you're doing ride cymbal. And listen to a lot of Iron Maiden, there's a lot of ride cymbal in verses. That was like
Mm-hmm.
almost like his trademark thing, which was I always thought was like incredibly cool. He had a very kind of, when I say specific feel, it just where you knew it was him. And anybody who could stand out in the crowd amongst many legendary players, drummers don't get the kind of credit as they should, as the guitar players, guitar hero. You don't even hear bass hero. Poor bass
Right.
players, man.
Yeah,
Man,
true.
thank God for like John Entwistle, Geesa Butler, and some of the other, and of course McCartney and some of these
McCartney.
guys.
Mhm.
I could name a slew of great bass players,
Right.
but these it's all a team, and everybody should get credit for what they contribute to the sound of any band. And I think he had a tremendous impact on the band. You
Agreed.
know,
Agreed. I read something last year and I went back and looked for it before we did this because you play drums, you're a drummer, right? I'm not. So you'll probably understand this much more than I do, other than I could understand the struggle maybe he was having. But he said after his stroke last year that he couldn't do 16 note rolls going into 32 note rolls anymore. And he had to adjust the way he played in the last year. Now, all I know for me is I said, okay, after his stroke, he couldn't play the same that he did beforehand, right? That's what I translated
yeah.
into. But what does that mean? I can't play 16 note rolls going into
Well,
32 note rolls anymore.
I mean, if I'm gonna do an old Mike Brun drum on the chest, here's what quarter notes is. I mean, 60 quarter, eighth, 16,
Mhm.
32nd. Now, 30 seconds will be really, really fast. I don't know if I'm gonna be
Mhm.
able to, but if you're doing a quarter note roll, it'll be 1, 2, 3, 4. So if the
Mhm.
tempo's like this, you're going 1, 2, 3, 4. If it's 8 notes, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's eight
Okay.
notes in the four. If it's 16 notes, it's 1, 2, 3, 4.
Right.
Now, if it's 32 seconds, that's more like,
Right.
so
Yeah.
so when you and they do those little, they
Hmm.
go and they hear those little. I mean, Neil Peart used to do it all the time. That's
Right.
I think just throw out my shoulder doing that.
And
But
so there goes my point, right? You're 50,
yeah,
whatever years old. He's 72. You know,
yeah,
it's
yeah. Well, it makes sense. I mean, the thing about um drummers that people don't understand outsider looking in is what's called independence, right? You have four limbs. How do
Mhm.
you separate your four limbs to do four different things? Your body naturally wants to move the same way,
Yep.
like this, you know?
Yep.
Then when you try to do this with the, a lot of, right and right, left leg and right, it's like your drummers traditionally play this way,
Yep.
and you're opening up your hi-hat and your bass drum's doing this and this hand's doing this. It's a really difficult thing to get that independence,
Yes.
you know? And So I can understand. I mean, now thinking about how you almost have to, not almost have to, when you have a stroke, it's like retraining you, relearning your brain, right? The mental and the physicality of it both. I mean, I don't even know how he did it, if he had the stroke in January
Yep,
and how he was playing this soon, because some people never recover from that. I mean, I know there's probably
absolutely.
different levels of strokes, but,
Yep. Yep.
you
No, and I
know,
wondered if after that he said we were talking about like how long did the band notice. I wonder if he said, "Hey, I want to do one more tour for myself because I want to go out on my own terms." I wonder if he knew from the start of this last tour if he was like, this is going to be it for me after this, but I don't want to make a big to do out of it. We'll announce it the last night. I mean, the guy who's coming in, Simon Dawson, to replace him, has played with Steve Harris for 10, 12 years or something like that. So he's clearly known by the guys in the band. But you know, it just says to me a lot about his dedication to the instrument and to the band is that
mm-hmm.
coming back from something like that and still being great. I never heard anybody who went in the last year saying, "Hey, Nicko just doesn't sound as good as he used to." I didn't hear any of that for the last year, and it just says a lot about him and what the band and drumming meant to him.
Yeah, I mean, I saw something even before this. I saw some recent footage of Iron Maiden play, and I was just curious to see how
Yeah,
Dickinson sounded. He sounded great,
sounds
the
great.
band sounded great. It's the stage show. I never really realized until I saw some special on Iron Maiden. It was something that was really awesome. I don't remember. You could look it up. I mean, just look up like Bruce Dickinson flying. They're touring playing like he's flying
Yep,
airplanes. Like it's
yep.
crazy. And they were showing them in other countries, and the fans. I mean, this band has. I mean, obviously, a lot of these bands are bigger outside of the U.S. I mean, they're like rabid,
Yes.
and
Agreed.
sing. And there were other countries, so they don't speak English or whatever, and they know all the lyrics, and it's just so enjoyable to watch
Yes.
when you see a band that, especially again, I don't want to beat a dead horse here, but especially since I love horses, that you know these things we took pride as kids. These were our bands, these were our guys, and we had to go through a bunch of years where they were forgotten. I mean, in the mid 90s we said it was a really hard time for a lot of these bands, and it was only till a lot of these bands became like retro, and I honestly think I don't know if we've ever really talked about it. I might have glanced upon it, but I think video games like Rock Band and Guitar Hero really brought back not only like these heavy metal bands, but like the Bostons of the world or the REO Speedwagons, because all of a sudden all these young kids are singing like "Take It on the Run" and "More Than a Feeling" and "It Shook Me All Night Long." Those video games really, because they were so popular in the mid to late 2000s, they were so popular, and it really brought a young audience these songs, and they got to know bands, and these bands like Sabbath and Maiden, they were all part of that, and I think that's great that another generation got to hear it. Hence now they're starting to tour and do these, and a lot of these bands, even Iron Maiden, were still putting out records, maybe not every year, every 2 years,
But
but
yeah,
there
but
was.
and one of the things I always respect about Maiden is that they didn't just live off the past and they didn't just play a quote unquote greatest hit set list. I mean, if you look at the set list of the tour that they just wrapping up, they weren't even doing Run to the Hills or Number of the Beast.
Mhm.
Imagine
Yeah,
going to see Maiden and they don't do those two songs. But nobody was complaining. They were mixing in some
no.
new songs. They were doing some songs from the 80s they hadn't done. Every tour, you knew if you were an Iron Maiden fan, every tour was going to be different. And it wasn't going to be the same standard, quote unquote, 15 songs with one or two
Hmm.
changes. And to me, that's something I always respected about them as a band and still do. And, you were talking about just their popularity globally. AC/DC, Iron Maiden, are they
Mm.
number two in terms of global popularity for the type of music we listen to? I'm hard pressed to think globally who is bigger than Iron Maiden besides maybe AC/DC
Hmm. Yeah,
in 2024.
yeah.
Guns N' Roses, maybe you can make a case. I happen to think maybe Iron Maiden is bigger, but you can throw Guns N'
Well,
Roses into that conversation, I guess.
yeah, yeah, and I think, and again, excuse me if I don't know the complete history, but what says a lot about Iron Maiden too is like I think at some point in the, well, I don't know if it was the early '90s, that Adrian Smith, I think, left or something like that, the band, and they brought in I don't know if he pronounces Janik
Mm-hmm.
Gears,
Yes. Mm-hmm.
and they brought him as the guitar player, And then when he came back, they kept
They
him.
kept him.
Like
Mhm.
they had the three guitar players. Like what band does that? I mean, that just shows you respect.
Yes,
You know, like you
yes.
know what? You've served us for 10 years. You still
You're
Adrian's back.
staying. Right.
You're staying. I mean,
You're
what is that?
staying.
I mean,
Did
it's
you
just
see the video clips of Nico's final performance in Brazil the other night?
no.
Talking about respect. So at the well, first during the show, of course, Bruce Dickinson announces that, hey, you've seen the release today. This is going to be Nico's final show, and the crowds there. I mean, I love the crowds in Brazil. How excited and into it they get,
Geese, some
and
geese,
then
some geese.
and they're chanting his name and they're singing different things. It's just the energy is incredible. At the end of the show, of course, Nico comes out from behind the drums in the front of stage. Bruce Dickinson mentions, hey, everybody knows of me as a pilot. Nico's a pilot also. He was first. So I was like, oh, wow, I never knew that actually.
Mm.
And they all, they took a picture all together. And then everybody else in the band walked off the stage and just gave him his final moment on the stage with the crowd. And the crowd's
Mm.
all cheering for him or whatever. And it was just like, to me, it just felt like such a cool moment. And it just felt very classy by the band, and you could just see him like taking it in like one last time over there. To me, it was just like, if you anybody who's watching or listening to this, if you haven't seen it, go check that out on YouTube. It's really just like a cool moment to me, and it was really like, I don't know, it was nice. To me, it's just another thing that Iron Maiden does and does right. To me, everything about the way they run their quote unquote business, I know it's a band, right? But everything about the way they do things is just classy and right. Whether it's keeping a guitarist when somebody comes back, whether it's, he's not the original drummer, but for 42 years, he was embraced as if he is, the only drummer in the band. And the fans embrace him, the band embrace him. Just everything about that band, just to me, I love the way they go about their business.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point.
Yeah. Did you ever see? So I believe, and somebody tell me if I'm wrong with this, but I believe, do you know what Nico's first appearance ever with the band was? This is a
No.
trick question a little bit. Okay. His first appearance, he was dressed up as Eddie on a German
Oh,
TV
really?
show. Yes. I'm like,
Pretty
how
funny.
freaking cool is that?
That is
So
pretty cool.
I think they knew he was already going to be coming into the band and they hadn't made an announcement. Again, fact check me on this. I might be wrong, but he was dressed as Eddie and came up on stage as part of his TV show, whatever, before he actually was the drummer in the band. I'm like, that's pretty freaking cool if you ask me.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
and this I've known for years. I've posted this on my Facebook page. Do you know where his nickname Nico comes from?
No.
So as a kid, he had a teddy bear that he loved called Nicholas the Bear. And if you see his drum set to this day, he's got a
Yeah, he's
little
got the
teddy
bear.
bear in front of it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I was always
But
wondering what that was.
right. So the bear was Nicholas the Bear. People started calling him Nicky and eventually became Nico. Right. So, but that's where but I love even just the fact that a 72-year-old man still to this day had that little teddy bear in front of his drum set.
Yeah.
It's like a little connection to his childhood, which, you and I always reminisce about things from our childhood. I just love that. And again, it just says a lot to me about him as a person that 70 plus years old, that teddy bear is still there. I just think
Yeah.
that's freaking awesome.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
But that's why, kind of bringing this all full circle to me, you said, well, this is, at the start, you said, well, this is not a happy podcast, but to me, it is. It is, because we get to celebrate him and he's still here and he still might record with the band. And he largely, I'm going to say, went out on his terms when he wanted to, came back from a stroke, was able to do another tour, get that crowd cheering for him one last time. To me, that's the way it should be with our musical heroes. I want them to get that last hurrah and be in a position where that they could see and hear that.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I just, from my point of view, is like anything that we've grown up loving and it has to end. It's not.
Yes.
It's never happy for me. I see what you're saying. However, we've debated this. Do we want Kiss to come back again and play
Right.
based on the circumstances? How the condition of Paul's voice and all that? No, I'm happy where it
Right.
is. There are certain things that
Yep.
except
And
for
look,
Saru.
Iron Maiden has dates, announced already for 2025. I have interest in going to see the band. I probably will. Will it be different with Simon Dawson on drums? I'm sure it will be. With no disrespect to him, he's clearly qualified and he's been playing with Steve Harris for 10, 12 years, Steve would not play with a drummer that's not fully qualified, right? So that's nothing about him as a replacement, but it's going to be different. It definitely will
Mm-hmm.
be. And from that point of view, I could understand what you're saying, that it's a little sad because little by little, all of these people, whether they retire, whether they can't do it anymore, whether they pass away, they're not with, they're not with us on stage anymore. And, just this
Mm-hmm.
past weekend, my wife and I watched, finally, the documentary, Nothing But a Good Time. And when it was done, we were like, damn, there'll never be another time like that for music. There never will be. And in the
Mm-hmm.
80s, you mentioned before, whether it was the Poisons and the Motley Crues and the Dawkins, and then there was the Iron Maidens and the Judas Priest, and they were different camps to some degree, if you were a fan, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now that to me, it's all one, right? And it's all just like 80s music, and we celebrate it all. But it's just what a freaking great time to be alive. If you're younger and you're watching and listening to this, you'll never fully understand what that was like in the 80s. Just having all of these bands constantly touring, putting out albums. Even I made in the friggin' album covers were just great, just in and of themselves. They're like friggin' amazing pieces of art, It's just
It's not just the heavy metal genre. It's all of 80s
yes.
80s music. I mean, as the same way you compare those bands, you can compare Huey Lewis and Hall and Oates and
Yeah.
Prince and Madonna and Michael Jackson, and I could go on and on.
Yeah.
I will always debate 70s versus 80s, like which was the better decade of music. I just say they're very different because of technology. I'm always going to be a 70s guy, no matter what, whether it's
Mm-hmm.
movies, television, or music, because that's our youth, and especially as becoming Kiss fans initially, 76, 77. But you're right, man. It's just, we have the memories, we have the records, we have the YouTube, Midnight Special, go watch Midnight Special. It's such an awesome, you could go down a rabbit trail,
Yes,
watching, it's so good. It
it
just
is.
really is. I'm always going to be appreciative that we grew up during that time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Anything else you could think of about Nicko, Iron Maiden that we want to talk about, or is that a wrap?
No, I guess no. I think I said pretty much how I felt about him as a drummer. Just gave you
Yeah.
some of the technicalities, as I always like to try to do.
Always appreciate
Go
that.
listen to Power Slave. Still, I think one of my favorites, if not
Mm.
my favorite Maiden album. If you don't listen to Aces High and 2 Minutes to Midnight and want to
Yes.
fling shit across the room, then
Hmm.
there's something wrong with you.
Yep.
No, that is just, oh man, just love it.
Yep. Agreed.
Uh,
No, no. And as the years have gone on, I've actually started to like those songs and albums even more than I did in the 80s. In the 80s, I was probably, I'll say, even though I had
I
like
was,
five or six Iron Maiden's albums, I was a
yeah,
casual Maiden fan.
I remember trying to convince you a little bit more
Hmm.
for some of these things, as you would
Yep.
try to do for me.
Yep.
I think I was definitely more in the Maiden camp, and more Metallica and that stuff. And at the time when you were really getting into like the punk and all that stuff,
Yep.
I was not getting into that stuff. You were, I only got to really appreciate the Ramones later on. And I said it to you, maybe it was a month ago.
Yes.
I was watching what was it, Sex Pistols on something, right?
Yep. Yep.
And I said, now that was an awesome performance,
Right. You actually
So
texted me something, the song Pretty Vacant. You're like, yeah, this
yeah,
song is great. And I was like, wait, who hacked Vinny's phone? Vinny for
yeah,
40 years has never said the Sex Pistols, anything Sex Pistols was
yeah.
great.
Because
So,
I'm not gonna just, I'm not gonna just say this, it's not good because I was, but I was like,
right,
oh, wow. Now
right.
I could maybe see why when he saw them in whatever was the 90s, why he
96. Yeah.
feels,
Yeah.
so
Yeah. Well, I think that's a wrap on this one. I think since it's Iron Maiden and it's Nicko, I think we up the irons. All
you do that.
righty, everybody. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Listen to your Maiden albums. Celebrate the legacy. There's an awful lot to celebrate, an awful lot to be excited about. And Nicko, thank you for 40 plus years of great drumming and great memories. And hopefully on vinyl, this is not the end. Thank you, everybody, for watching as always. Till next time, up those irons. Later,
Okay.
everybody.
Later.
Alrighty, there you have it. I'd like to close by thanking Nicko for over 4 decades of incredible memories, incredible drumming on incredible songs. Thank you so much, Nicko. If you're watching this on YouTube, hit that subscribe button below. If you're listening to one of my podcasts, subscribe over there as well. Also, head on over to Facebook and follow my page, The Rock Experience with Mike Brunn, where each and every day we talk about all the rock and roll music that you love. You could also follow me on Instagram and Twitter as well. That's it for this episode. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. See you all next time.